This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
The second sponsor of the show is TravCon, the Travelers Conference. I'm super excited to announce them as a sponsor of the show. TravCon was there for me before I got started as a medical nomad, and now I'm actually involved with the planning of the event. So super aligned, super congruent. I've been promoting them before they were even a sponsor, and so I'm excited to have them on. So there are 3 main reasons that you should go to TravCon this year. Number 1, value. This is the cheapest conference to go to as a medical professional. And also the only place that I've ever felt like royalty when you're walking in and all these staffing agencies and all these recruiters want to talk to you and you're bumping elbows with these travelers and they're interested about your story, about where you're coming from and what you're doing. And it's overall just a really good feel-good event. Number 2 is education and growth. So this conference was founded on the realization that there's a lot to know to be a medical traveler, to be a medical nomad. And so this is where you go to get the most updated tax information. This is where you go for those really niche specific questions on what's it like to travel in an RV and what's it like to travel to Hawaii. And then 3rd, community. This is where a lot of my traveler friends that are very near and dear to my heart right now, this is where we met. So this is where the relationship sparked. It's also one of the only places that you get to go to and see the leaders and meet the leaders of the industry, both on the staffing agency side and on the traveler side, and also get to meet your recruiters face-to-face that you've been working with. So TravCon is always in September every year. TravCon is also always in Las Vegas. The link is going to be in the show notes for you to get your ticket. I'll be at TravCon. All my friends will be at TravCon. I hope to see you there. Hey Nomads, Dylan coming at you, a newly acclaimed world traveler. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dylan Callier, and today's episode just going over what an amazing trip I had in Thailand and Indonesia, and my dream trip, something I've been wanting to do for 4 years when I was reading Vagabonding by Rolf Potts, laying on a futon because I couldn't afford a place to live at the time, and just this imagination of what my life was going to look like and what I wanted it to look like, and still wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it. So finally did it. The trip was so amazing and I was so happy, and I'm still so happy. And the only regret I have is that I didn't get to do this trip sooner, that I didn't prioritize it sooner, that this didn't happen 4 years ago. So I got some shout outs to do for some friends that I promised. And I'm actually going to take a sip of this travel coffee mug. No point. I just think the mug's really cute. And I used it kind of as a prop for the new sponsor, TravCon. I have to be really careful not to knock over this makeshift desk that I have so that I can stand up and talk about this. And so I'm going to be talking about my experiences, kind of the perspectives that I've had, overall, my experiences in Thailand and Indonesia or Bali. And if you are interested in those travels, hopefully will bring some light to you. And so these are the individuals that I got to run into. So I took 2 months overseas, 1 month in Thailand, 1 month in Indonesia. It was an absolute dream. So shout out to Jared and Whitney of Fifth Wheel PT for meeting me in Thailand. First time I got to meet those guys in person. Definitely go check them out. Shout out to Pensy for besting Jared and Whitney with me in beer pong. Pensy was very fun and for some reason liked to pick me up random times, and you were just a lot of fun. So thanks so much. Adam, my good and dear long friend, for coming and experiencing the elephant sanctuaries with me, and for the deep conversations like we always have, very educational, very philosophical. very action oriented. So always appreciate you, brother. Demi, for showing me all the coffee culture in Chiang Mai. That's where like the number one people for like latte art, they're from Chiang Mai. Who knew? And so first, thank you, Demi, so much for taking me around. You absolutely made my stay in Chiang Mai so much better. Absolutely appreciate you. For my last night in Thailand, Thalia, Lucas, Lorenzo, and Alishka. I think I'm pronouncing your name right. I know we went through that so many times. I hope that I'm still pronouncing that right. For meeting me and going with me to the Ladyboy Cabaret. And as any good new friends would, recording when I got pulled up on stage multiple times. So shout out to you guys. What a fun night. What an adventure. Shout out to Sabina and Maya for getting me outside my comfort zone and going snorkeling for the first time. Oh my gosh, I thought heights were my only like scary thing that I was like anxious about. And then you realize like the ocean's so deep and you're like snorkeling and you're like, wow, I'm really high up just in the water. And yeah, so thanks for pushing me outside my comfort zone, especially Sabina. We had some really good talks about business and getting outside comfort zones and relationships. And so thank you so much. I hope you're doing well. And also Sabina and Yo-Yo, the travel couple that allowed me to third wheel. Thank you. For making that three-way massage not as awkward as it could have been. So we all went and got a massage together, and they just happened to have a room that just had 3 beds in it. It was kind of strange, but it was great. Thanks so much for beach hopping with me. So you don't necessarily bar hop in Indonesia. You kind of beach hop and just go to the next one and the next one. Isa, for going with me and trekking 2 volcanoes in a row. You are a boss. Thank you so much. And finally, Agus, for taking care of me all throughout Indonesia, for putting up with me, for these stories I'm about to share about some troubles that I ran into and some questions, and just thank you so much. I'm hoping to have Agus on the show and eventually. And so if you are going to Bali, Indonesia, please reach out to me, message me. Agus runs kind of a business where he takes care of all these travelers coming into Bali, and he is the go-to person when it comes to knowing what's going on, what you can and can't do, because sometimes like if a volcano is like smoking, you're not supposed to hike it apparently. So he's the person to go to. I highly recommend him. He's one of my friends too. So if you're going to Bali and you're like, oh, it's last minute, I can't get a hold of Dylan, just go ahead and look at my friends, Agus, Agus. Contact him. He will take care of you. He is amazing. So those are my shout outs. Those are peeks into some of the adventures I had. And oh my gosh, I mean, I specifically recorded the travel blogger series before I left so that I wouldn't have to worry about anything. I could just focus on this adventure. And my style was very different from some of the other styles of traveling. So when I went to Indonesia and Thailand, I just kind of went with the flow. I didn't really plan anything, especially when it came to Indonesia. For Thailand, there was like a list of things that I kind of wanted to do, but it was never like, go to this city, stay here 3 nights, travel to the next city, stay here 3 nights, travel to the next city. And so it was all very with the flow. So if I landed in Koh Lanta, which is an amazing beach, is my #1 spot in Thailand, for all the sunsets, and it's like, wow, this is an amazing place. I'm going to stay here a little bit longer, versus then having like a rigid schedule. And so that's kind of the experiences I had. Most of the stuff that I did other than the elephant sanctuary was not planned in advance. And the only plan I had going in was 15 days in southern Thailand to start out with, 15 days in northern, and then after that I was going to go to Indonesia. And so that is kind of how I managed this whole trip. I'm a very last minute person. My family gets driven nuts with me and my friends because I do everything kind of last minute. So an example of this is I was an hour from boarding the plane in order to fly to Thailand and to Bangkok, and I didn't have a place to stay. So an hour before the plane, I booked my hostel on hostelworld.com. Luckily I did so, because turns out you need an address to put on your form of where you're going to be staying in Thailand. And so otherwise I wouldn't have had an address. And I'm very, very lucky that I did it before there, because I was considering just doing it once I landed, but it was going to be super late at night. So I was like, oh, I'm just going to do it now. And so it turned out to to work out in my favor. But that's kind of it. I also, when staying at a hostel, would go and I'd say, oh, I'm going to stay here 2 nights. And this was more in Indonesia, where it's more laid back. Thailand, there's so many hikes and so many places to go see. I usually only spent about 2 nights in one location. When I went to Indonesia, it was like more like 4 or 5. It was very laid back, very chill. And so I would get there and be like, oh, I'm going to stay here 2 nights. And then second night would come around. It's like, oh, I'll extend a day, and I'll extend another day, and I'll extend another day. And so that worked out great for me. I kind of stumbled onto my adventures. And so for me, if I plan a whole bunch of stuff and then something doesn't happen, I kind of regret that. And it's like, oh, so like that downer of having something planned and not doing it is more of a like an emotional hit for me versus just kind of stumbling onto an adventure, which is way more exciting. And so that's my travel style. You will have your own travel style, but that's kind of what I do. And for extending every night, there's definitely travelers that do that. It only did not work out for me like twice. And then still the areas that I was in with hostels, I just walked next door and then they had an extra bed that I could stay. And then if I ended up wanting to go back to that place, I could. So that is the overarching organization of the trip or lack of organization, whichever you want to talk about. And there's some very interesting parts in the trip. So going into this trip, I thought, oh, I'm going to have this moment where I walk on the beach. Like as soon as I get there, I'm going to walk on the beach, and just this feeling of happiness and emotions and crying is probably going to happen. Like one of my things is I promise my friends, if I ever have an experience where I'm so happy that I start crying, I'm going to have to get it tattooed on me. Kind of a joke. I'm really not a tattoo person, but also I have friends that'll probably hold me to that. So we'll see. So when I got there, I thought, first thing I was going to do is go to the beach, but that wasn't exactly what happened. So Bangkok is kind of in the middle of Thailand. And so I ended up staying there 2 nights, acclimating to the different time zone. And then I went to this southern part. So I never truly had that experience of like overwhelming. It definitely kind of came in different ways of being like, oh, wow, there's a lot of tuk-tuks here, a lot of taxis, and I'll be talking about those. So it was a different kind of overwhelming when you're a different culture and kind of that culture shock. But never truly had that just big flood of emotion up until about Koh Lanta, when I was just sitting on a beach, and it's just that realization of this is where your life is. This is what you're doing right now, super present. That's always something that I've struggled with. I've always thought about the future and kind of planning and stuff like that goes along with the type A personality. But being present is something that I've always struggled with. And this trip helps so much, where you're just sitting on a beach and you're like, wow, like I am here. I am here on the other side of the world. How cool is my life? And so that's when it finally hit. It wasn't immediate. It was much later. And there are also parts of the trip that there are definitely differences that allowed me a greater perspective. And that's really why I said I regret not doing it sooner, because I think those perspectives would be so good to know sooner. And so I'll be talking about those, but also there's some similarities. And there's this part that I remember kind of driving through Thailand. One was driving through Krabi in southern Thailand. And then another was driving in northern Thailand, where you're driving and it reminded me of home. It reminded me of kind of these older like 80s buildings that were kind of white on the outside. It was more tin, but they were made white, but they're dirty because they haven't been cleaned in a while and they're just older. And so there's a lot of buildings like that in Thailand. So there are definitely similarities that you discover that go across cultures, that go across international borders. And that's a really cool feeling too, when you kind of feel like, wow, I wasn't expecting this to be the same. And then things that you think would be the same are definitely not the same. And so that's a really cool feeling when you're driving through and you get reminded. And so you see the similarities. And so that's cool. And oh goodness, the perspectives. So I'll talk about the differing kind of cultures. No, we'll stick with perspectives. So with perspectives, it makes you so grateful for what you have. And I know just through experiences, if I'm feeling down and somebody says, hey, there are starving kids in Africa, like you should feel better. Like no one ever feels better after that. It only makes you feel worse. But when you're in a place and you're experiencing it and you're like, wow, you know, I get down on myself for the type of kind of lifestyle and where it came from and stuff. But when you see kind of like poverty, it's much different. And so this was my first real experience with that. And so the examples of this is walking through the streets of Thailand and seeing rats this bigger than my foot kind of crawling out of trash cans. And so seeing that, and then there's not really a big homeless culture there for whatever reason. But then you also kind of walk through, and so this was in northern Thailand in Chiang Mai, walking to and from some of the bars, and you come across, there was this bridge that we had to cross, and it was over kind of the sewage of the city. So not sewage in the sense of like fecal matter going into it, but more sewage of when it rains, this is where it drains into. And then there's a small little kind of like sewage river creek that runs out. And so it doesn't smell terrible like it would if it was like, you know, more like the other type of sewage, but it doesn't smell good either. And so it is on the kind of more bad side. And so you're walking through and you're like, ooh, that's right. And then you realize these homes right next to you, they're more like shacks where the inside is a very small room, and that's where the whole family sleeps. And so this is where grandma or grandpa and the parents and the 3 little kiddos running around, this is where they all sleep. And then the living room, so to speak, would be outside. And so the TV is outside. Then there's a roof on top. So if it rains, they can still kind of watch it if it's wet season. And that's where they live. They live right by this kind of like sewage place. And it's like, there's no AC. Maybe they have some fans on the inside. But everything's kind of outside as well, with them being right next to this creek. And it just brings a lot of perspective into how I grew up, into how grateful and thankful I am for where I grew up, for the opportunities that I've had, for the opportunities I get presented to myself, that I can have the fortunate ability to take advantage of and be in a place where I get to pursue them. So that was one of the big life lessons that I had on this trip, was being so grateful and maintaining that kind of tranquility mindset of, wow, like, you know, I'm here. I'm doing the best I can. I might be starting in a different place than this other person that I'm comparing myself to, which I have no right to do, but we do anyhow because we're human. And just those experiences really make you feel like, holy cow, I have it so good. And so that was one of the life lessons. And then it's a differing culture. And so this is more for Thailand, less so for Indonesia. I'll be hitting on Indonesia in another episode. But the differing culture, some things I looked up to, some things I did not look up to. And so one of the big ones when me and Adam went to the elephant sanctuary was seeing these elephant caretakers and their choice to, instead of work and make good money as like a manual laborer or a factory worker or whatever other opportunities they had, they decided to kind of make a little less money and go take care of these elephants, or maybe a lot less money. I really don't know. And they were 100% happy. It was so much work. Me and Adam stayed overnight. We went out and we took this like machete and we were chopping down like food for these elephants, because they eat this kind of like bamboo like plant, and they eat so much. And so it's a full-time job of getting this food for them. And so it's nonstop. And so they wake up super early in the morning. They go out, chop, 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 get food, feed the elephants. Take care of the elephants, take them on walks, things like that. If they need medicine, feed them medicine. And you have to like hand make the medicine because they're not going to just eat pills. So you have to like put it in rice balls and rice patties and feed them a lot of bananas. And then you take them out. And then, okay, they're going to rest now. And so now it's lunchtime. So we're going to go chop some more food for the elephant, make sure they're feeding. take them for another walk. Okay, sun's about to go down. I'll go chop more food. And so it's full day activity every single day, in and out. And they were 100% happy. And I was reflecting on going to one of these conferences in Ohio, where it was a lot of these big business persons, the people walking around in the black lanyards and making, presumably like having $1 million business or having a higher $6-figure business. And that conference, most of the talks were surrounding happiness. And so that was one of the things that I was sitting, nowhere near the front with the black lanyards. I'm like way in the back up in the balcony seats and like looking at all these guys and thinking like, wow, they have so much, but they're not happy. So I need to figure out this whole happiness thing before I start introducing, people under payroll and more stress and making sure I'm still congruent with my life intentions. And that was a big realization for me, was that if you're not happy where you're at, you're probably not going to be happy moving forward and progressing either. So you got to figure out the happiness here, and you got to figure out what you're going to have to do, because it could be situational, right? A lot of medical nomads get into this because they're burned out on the same facility that they've been at. And so it could be 100% situational, and realizing like, oh, my environment, whether it be friends or work or family, whatever, I need to get away from it. But there's also the other side of, okay, so I left home, I'm here now, and I still have that feeling of unhappiness. I'm better, but it's not truly, fully happy. And I realized with these elephant caretakers is that you can be happy with whatever situation you're in, and we just got to figure it out. We just got to figure out what's going on and getting into a more grateful state. I think for me, and not being so future mindseted, but being present, just being so thankful for what I have. And so that was the big, one of the big life lessons when kind of interacting with these elephant caretakers. And they're so funny. They were like singing the whole time, and like the only English that they knew was from the songs. And there was some really good elephant caretakers that knew English as well, that could actually speak, because they went to monk school, to a monastery. I actually don't know if that's the right term. So they went to monk school. That's a lot. If you come from a poor background in Thailand, that's kind of where in your young boy, you go to be a monk. And then that's how you receive education. And then I don't know if most, some end up becoming a full monk as they grow up. Some leave monk school. And so these individuals left monk school and knew a little bit of English. And so we got to ask them questions and listen to them talk about, the mission that they had about taking care of these elephants. And that's kind of what their life revolved around. So it wasn't something just big and egotistical like we have here in the States. It was a very, very focused mission of, this elephant has had a terrible life working in the lumber industry, and now she's here and I'm taking care of her. And if we can keep having tourism come in, we can do this for another elephant. And so they were saying they've taken care of 6 elephants in the past 2 years. And they're growing. So in the next 2 years, maybe they can help 12 elephants or 12 more elephants. And so very exciting. And just you see it in their eyes when they speak about it, and the smiles. And it was an emotional experience. Other perspectives and other kind of parts of differing culture. I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this one. This one's kind of a really big bummer, but I decided being a big bummer wasn't a good enough reason not to tell this on the show. So this one is kind of what Thailand is notorious for, and it's ping pong shows. And so there's definitely a sexual tourism that goes into Thailand. And I was lucky enough to really get told about it before I went to Thailand. Now, I will say, before you go to Thailand and you search Thailand on Google search to see what's out there, what do you want to do? It's probably the second or third thing that you're going to stumble across is something called ping pong shows. And so I'll tell you the story that was told to me by my friends about they went to this ping pong show, and they just thought it was kind of like a kind of like a similar type, like strip show, or similar feeling to like a cabaret, where there's some sort of entertainment involving nudity. And so they get told that they're going to have to go to this ping pong show, or they get to go. So they hop in this taxi. This taxi takes them to this weird back alley place. And then they show up, and then it's like super sketch walking in. And then it's really like high price. Like you don't really pay, like there's rules. You have to pay like for a drink that's like way overpriced, and or pay 2 drinks or something like that. And so you walk in, and these Thai women are performing these sexual acts involving ping pongs and much more things that I'm not going to get into, but where they kind of stick it into the vagina and they shoot it out. Now, the really kind of unfortunate part of this, or more disturbing part that my friends talked about, was the lack of affect or lack of facial expression, where these just women did not look happy, that they did not like want to be there, that it was almost like kind of against their will sort of thing. And so they left. And then as they were trying to leave, they were, being told like, you can't leave, like you have to buy more, and try and get pressured into that stuff. And so it was kind of a sketchy situation. Thailand's very safe. And so they weren't really in danger, but they were trying to get, kind of strong armed into giving more money. And so they left, and then they ended up just kind of like crying out on the street because of this experience. And so I was lucky enough to have that story told to me before I went. And it's interesting because these still happen. People still go to the show kind of knowing what they're about. And maybe they don't realize just how it's perceived. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing, if maybe that's part of the entertainment of them to not have any facial expression, different cultures and stuff. But I was kind of looking into it, and it's very interesting with Thailand, because for a woman in Thailand, she is supposed to support her family. And so they're expected to go out and work and earn money for the family. Not only just for their kids, but also the husband, and then also their parents. And so it is a bigger dishonor, or a bigger indecency for a woman to stay at home and not earn cash, versus to go out and perform these kind of sexual acts with objects. And the reason that it's so sketchy with this sexual tourism is that in Thailand, it's not actually illegal for these to exist. What's illegal is them going out on the streets, holding up a sign saying ping pong show, and then they make these like strange noises as you're walking down, like, and it's really kind of unsettling. But that's actually the illegal part. Solicitation is the illegal part. And so when the cops kind of come around in those busy areas, those busy streets, and these are usually more kind of in the areas of like what I call the party areas, like PP, Koh Phi Phi, Phuket, Koh Phangan, places like that. The cops will come by Khao San Road in Bangkok, and cops see them, or more likely the gentleman with the sign sees them, or lady with the sign sees them, and then they will like kind of skirt away until the cops leave, and they'll come back and try and get more people to go to that place to see the ping pong show. And so I think that really comes down to individuals that knew what they were walking into, maybe not to the extent, but knew what they were walking into, and still went to those. That was very interesting to me, because that doesn't feel very congruent with what you stand for. So if you're against kind of sexual exploitation or the sexual tourism, whether or not it's by their choice, and you go in and you pay money, you're supporting that. And I guess the other side of the argument is like, oh, well, if they're not doing that, which is like one of the best ways for a Thai woman to make money, then they don't have another option. And while that might be true, and that might be a valid argument, I disagree with that, because even if you show up and you're paying, like, you're paying money for her to support her family or whatever, you're still supporting the problem. And to just go in ahead and accept and say that's just the way it is very uncreative, and not a very good way to look at problems that we have in this world, to say like, oh, well, it's either this or that, not thinking of, oh, there's actually a third solution where they could go out and work somewhere else if we only didn't support them and support the sexual tourism, so that they would have the option to go do that. So that's kind of my stance on that. That was way longer, way more in depth than I was planning, but that's definitely a big cultural part for Thailand. So I highly support everyone not to go to those. Like myself, I refused to go, and did have some friends that decided to go, and that actually I haven't got to talk to them to see what their experiences were, but not my thing. I hope you stay congruent with your choices, and it's still a really good time in Thailand. I hope this doesn't put a kind of damper on it, but there are two sides to every trip, and that's definitely something. And Thailand's actually taking a stance against it, which is cool. I don't know about that specific thing with the legal laws and stuff, but when you walk into the airports, they have these videos playing, and they have kind of posters up about it, about sexual tourism. So they're really taking a stance against this, and that's exciting to have this change, because you'll be walking down the road and there will be this, like, I'm going to really dig into the stereotypes here, this older white man sitting at these like go-go bars with these Thai women kind of all around, and then you're walking through, and then the ladies will come up and kind of grab you by the arms, and like, if you don't go in with them, they will hold your arm for about a block before they let go, or lady boys, which will be the next point. But that's definitely, depending on where you go, there's more party scenes. That is what to expect, and you just keep walking forward. I didn't really make eye contact or anything like that. I didn't give them anything. I just said no, thank you, no, and then eventually you kind of get out of that area. But up in the north, not as much as there are in the south for that particular scenario. So the other thing to talk about that I thought was very interesting was the ladyboy culture in Thailand. And so I don't know how long the ladyboy culture has been going on, but from what I gather, ladyboys are okay and accepted in Thai culture. If you are a gay male, you are not. And I still don't have a grasp on this. I'm just going to talk about it. But if you're a gay male, it's frowned upon. And I don't know to the extent. I don't know if that's to how much retaliation goes into that. But if you're, a male and you identify as a ladyboy, you're okay. So that's very interesting. So you can actually go to ladyboy cabarets, which is kind of part of the Thai culture for me, where it was more just kind of dancing, and they wear all these costumes, and it was actually very colorful. It was a very fun night. And I did have to dance up on stage for a little bit. We're not going to talk about that, but if you go, also my friend Jody, he got pulled up as well. So I don't know what it is about our faces. We always just end up getting pulled up on stage, but ladyboys, they're very forward, and they're not secretive about it. And so you can go and get like it's advertised, right? Like ladyboy massage. And you are walking down the street, and you know which ones are ladyboys, and they're very forward with it. And so that was just something interesting that, for me, I don't quite see the difference between, kind of that deciding for, well, I mean, there is a difference. I do see the difference, but I don't understand why a culture would be okay with, sexual orientation of a ladyboy versus a gay male. And so that was something very interesting within the Thai culture, and one of the things I've been reflecting on. But that is kind of my experience with mostly Thailand. I did go into Indonesia for a little bit, but mostly Thailand. And so my favorite spots, Koh Lanta was number one. Oh, it was just that moment of that when the emotions hit. I was sitting on the beach watching. It was early morning, having like a breakfast, and I had ordered an entire mango, and they cut it up for me. I just ate like a whole mango. So I'm like that guy that just eats a lot and eats a ton. And I always get stared at when I go to restaurants. But I was sitting on the beach, and to my left, there was a guy building a boat, kind of building a canoe, and these really old time, like hand built boats. Like, how cool is that? And so that was one of my favorite spots. And you can go out and walk on the beach, and there's like fire shows where they have sticks and stuff, and they're throwing them in the air and catching them, and it's like really scary. And one guy caught his hair on fire. It's like, oh my gosh. And it was just a really, really good time in Koh Lanta. My number 2 spot was Chiang Mai. It's kind of a city, but it's smaller. It's very chilled and relaxed. And the coffee culture there was great. That's not too far away was the elephant sanctuaries. There was a lot of like Doi Inthanon that you could hike. That was probably one of the most gorgeous hikes that I went on. And it was just absolutely incredible. And so those were my top 2 favorite spots within Thailand. Also a good shout out is Pai up in the north. That is more of a touristy area. So I'll give an example. Koh Lanta is very chill. There's not a lot of resorts on Koh Lanta, because the island isn't connected by a bridge, and also the island is very big. So I actually thought it was a part of Thailand. I didn't realize that it was actually a separate island. But because it's so big, like the resorts that pop up, they're very kind of spread out, so it doesn't feel very touristy. Whereas you go to Koh Lipe, Lipe, that place, I was reading blogs from like 3-4 years ago, and they're like, this was the Koh Lanta of 10 years ago. 20 years ago. I was like, oh my gosh, like Koh Lanta was so nice. I want to go to this place. Well, within that time of 3 to 4 years, Koh Lipe had all these resorts pop up. And so I get there, I'm like, oh no. And so I'm walking around the island. It's very small. And that's why. So these resorts popped up on the small island and just like kind of took over the island. And there's more, there's more white people walking around than locals. And so you're like, oh, it's very touristy. And it was a different experience, and not necessarily the spots that I want to go to. And so Koh Lanta was very chill. Koh Lipe was not. And for kind of a middle ground was Pai up in the north of Thailand, where there's a lot of expats, the expatriates, people that work from home, that decide, you know what, I'm not going to stay in the States. I'm just going to go work out of Thailand, where it's super cheap and I'm living in paradise type of thing. And so there's a lot of persons from the States and Canada and the UK. And so there were a lot of white persons there as well. Not to put it down to just white people that are from the States, and get into that whole thing. But, you recognize kind of the tourism more there, but it's not really in your face. So it's not like a lot of like boom, 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 like party scenes, although there is a party scene at night. But it's very chill, very relaxed, and there's still a lot of the locals there, which are really cool to talk to, especially the monks. I got to have one conversation with a monk, very brief, which was really cool. I've heard of people having like maybe hour to 2 hour conversations with these monks. And one time walking around kind of the zoo up in Chiang Mai, the monk school got let out, and all these like little monks are running around and seeing all these animals. So that was a cool experience too. And then there was a part where we went up into kind of the more sacred areas with the monks. And one of the things that will always kind of be in my mind is seeing a monk play with a puppy, kind of like running back and forth, and the puppy chasing him, and then he would chase the puppy and the puppy would run away. And I mean, this dog was tiny, like must have been like 8 pounds max. And it was so cute, and just seeing the happiness and kind of, it was just a cool experience. And watching this older monk play with this puppy will be something that I remember. But that is my reflection on the trip. Absolutely recommend it if you are on the fence of making a big trip like this. I never felt unsafe on my trip. I've definitely felt unsafe in St. Louis, where I spent 7 years. I've never felt unsafe in Thailand or Indonesia. It's very, not saying, well, I'll leave it at this. you want to stay smart, but the instances of you running into trouble seem to be less in these areas than here in the United States. So if your fear is, oh, it's not safe, I know it's different for women, but I highly recommend. I met a lot of women solo travelers that were doing it. I want to encourage anybody that's on the fence to just go ahead and do this. The reason I picked Thailand and Indonesia first out of my list of all the places I want to live is because it's the cheapest. And so my personal goal is to live on all continents before I turn 30. And by living, that means at least spending 30 days on that continent. And so that is my goal moving forward. We'll see if I can hit it. It's, I was thinking when I was setting the goal of setting it for 40, but that didn't like put the pressure on me of like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And when I said 30, I was like, oh no, it's like, yes, that's the goal I want. I want the goals that seem a little impossible to obtain. So we shall see. I got about 3-ish years to do that. And I got quite a bit of continents to go. So that's my reflection on Thailand and Indonesia. All you nomads, thanks for joining me. Again, if you like this, liking, commenting, subscribing to the YouTube channel. You can find more of these on Spotify and iTunes. If you're liking this, all the engagement that goes towards this allows more people to see this information, which is ultimately the goal of this podcast, the goal of this show, to help people who are being medical nomads, but also helping them take that next step into that life that they want to live and go travel overseas and go live their dream. So thank you so much, guys. I got a lot of recording today. I got a lot to talk about this trip. So all you nomads have safe travels.